Hi, I'm Eileen Eder, and I want to introduce you to color mixing. There are three primary colors: yellow, red, and blue. And I also have here white. You can't mix colors to get these. You have to buy these. But from these three primaries, you can make or mix almost any color that exists. So I'm going to show you. If you mix the primary red with yellow, you'll get orange. Try to make that pretty even. Different pigments are different strengths. If you mix red and blue, you'll get purple. And if you mix blue and yellow, you'll get green. So these three colors that I mixed from the primaries are referred to as secondaries. Now, here comes the fun part. Suppose you want to dull or darken a color. If I take this green and I add a dot of the complementary or opposite color, it will change it completely. It will lose its color vibrancy. It will become much duller and darker. This red pigment is so strong, I'm going to add a little more green so you can see. And of course, depending on how much you add of one or the other, here it is with just a hair of that reddish, and it becomes much duller than the original. If I keep adding it, you'll get brown. Let's add a little more. And eventually you'll get a black. Let me do the same thing with this, with the blue. So here we're starting out blue. The opposite color from blue is orange. And a little tiny bit of it will change it drastically. So as long as you're mixing two colors on the color wheel, the primary colors that are next to each other, you will get a clean, clear color, secondary color. But as soon as you add the opposite or missing color, you will get duller, darker, which is actually appropriate if you're looking to put something in shadow or is not a brightly colored item. Here's the purple. The strengths of these pigments are so different that you'll have to practice and play with these in order to get a true, perfect in-between color. But basically, the point is that with red, yellow, and blue, you can end up coming up with any color you need with the addition of the complementary or opposite color, or if you need to, which will give you dark with the darks, or if you need to, adding some white to your color, which will bring you lighter on the value scale. When you're working with objects that you're trying to paint, often depending on how the light is affecting it, if you're going to darken it, of course you add the opposite or complementary color. If you're lightening it, you'll usually have to add white, and often you'll have to add yellow as well. And you'll see that in my demonstration with a red object to come. Learning to mix colors is a skill. The more you practice, the better you will be. But learning to see the differences in colors is also really important to learn, and you'll learn that along with practicing mixing your colors. Purple and yellow mixed together. Again, will give you a black. Each one of these colors, black is a combination of all three colors, and you can mix those and get anything from brown to black very easily. If you want to keep it clean though, just use the two colors next to each other if you want to keep the vibrancy. So when you're mixing colors, what I suggest to my students is to go to the hardware store, get a bunch of paint samples, and really the more neutral, the better. They're a little bit harder to do than something that is close to the color out of the tube. That is always easier. If you don't want to do that, another option is to just grab some common objects around the house and try to match those colors. The practice that you get doing these color mixing exercises will really help you when you go to paint something in still life or landscape or portrait. And that experience in mixing will really help you tremendously. So I'm going to try and mix these two neutral colors. Let's start with this one, which is a little bit harder. So it's a gray, and it's not, it's almost a pure neutral gray. So it's going to be a mixture of all three again. So we've got some yellow and red. It's giving me orange, obviously. The opposite on the color wheel of orange is blue. Don't add black, add the complementary color. And it's looking a little warm, so I think I'll add more blue. And let me add a little white and test that. It's looking bluish because I may have overshot it, so I'm going to take some more orange. These pigments are strong. It doesn't take much to get the color that you need. So it's always better to go in little bit by little bit. And you can see how this is beginning, hopefully you can see from there, how this is beginning to really get closer and closer to this neutral gray that I have on this card. And just using these three primaries, red, yellow, and blue, I indeed can almost match every color that there is. I think it needs a tiny bit more warmth Get a little more white. Okay, that's about as perfect as I think I can get. In fact, I'll add some to the card and we'll see. I've got one here that's a little bluer. Obviously, if I just add a little blue to this gray mix, I'll be able to obtain that color. And only by comparison can I tell the difference. So this right now is, that was pretty easy then. One more, we'll take a lighter root. This is obviously a lot warmer than those neutrals, but it's still a pretty blah color. The closest color that starts out would be the orange. And it doesn't take much blue to change this orange. There, it's already brown. As you do these, you will get faster and faster. And it looks to me like it's missing a little yellow. And you'll see me wiping off my knife constantly because it only takes tiny bits of the pigment to make a change. Okay. Now this is a little more vibrant than what we've got, so just a pinhead of blue is going to tip that back toward a more neutral. If this is feeling too yellow-orange, the opposite, always go for the opposite if it needs to be dulled or darkened a little. Okay, and I put in a pinhead, and you can see the difference. It was the complementary color that did it. So I'm going to switch now to a small still life I have out. So I want to talk about how light and color affects objects. So I've got a red apple that is a little different red than the red bowl here. I'm going to basically take the red and show you how it changes color and lightens, not with white, but with other color, with yellow, as it reaches the top, and how the shadow will be a bit of the complementary color added in to make that shadow color. So again, I'm working with my three primaries, red, yellow, and blue. My secondaries, orange, green, and purple. And the only place where there is pure, strong red is going to be in the transition between the light and the shadow. Where the light hits an object, it is lighter and brighter, and depending on the color of your light source, that will also have a difference on the color that you have in the light. It could be daylight, which is cooler, but in this case it's an incandescent warm light which has a yellow-orange cast to it. So as I always say, imagine that any place where there is light shining, there's a little extra yellow-orange coloring that. So typically when I paint, I start with my darkest darks. So squinting down, the darkest darks are on the shadows underneath the objects. And in fact, remember that black that I made up? I can put that, which is total lack of light, under the edge. I'm doing this with a palette knife because we're going to be doing more mixing than anything. And also I want to keep the shapes and the pieces of color as clear as possible. So that is my absolute darkest dark. Now I'm working with this green paper that's on the tabletop. Green is the complement, the opposite of red. So you'll see that adding some of the red into the green paper will give me my shadow, and at the same time adding some of the green into the red will give you that shadow. So working with complementary mixes are pretty fun and pretty simple. I've got two behind me that are using the other primaries. So I'm going to start with the red and add the complementary color, which is green. And you'll see I've already begun to get a shadow color. I'm going to add a little purple to get that deeper. And sometimes if you're in doubt, just literally close one eye and hold it up, and you'll get a pretty good idea if you're in the right category or not. So this is my shadow color, basically. It's going to be darkest at the bottom. And you can do this obviously with a brush as well. Because this is a shadow box, I've got some pretty dark reflection at the corner picking up from the black box. I want to mix the shadow color that's under there. So I've got green. I'm going to add a little bit of red. And I think the green that I need is going to need a little extra blue because it is a shadow and it is picking up some of the gray-blue reflections in the room. So you can see how my green immediately turned into more of a shadow color. Now shadows are very soft-edged, and as they move away from the object, they get a lot lighter. I can use the same color on the shadow behind the red. If you squint, you'll see that shadows have a lot of similarity. Shadows are made from the objects, the paper that they're on, and the light, the color of the room or surrounding area. So now I'm going to take this and lighten it up. It's picking up more blue because that is from the gray of this room. So now my shadow is beginning to change. And yes, working with the palette knife can be more difficult than a brush sometimes, but it will also give you a clean piece of color that allows you to keep it thick and have fun with. I enjoy palette painting. It's a good break from the usual. Going back to the reds, the one spot where you get the most color is in the transition. It's a small space between the shadow and the light. It is not affected by the shadow. It's the only thing not affected by the shadow and not affected by the light. So I'm going to put that in. And let's go put the shadow in on this guy too. Now it gets a little darker underneath that container, so I'm going to, I went for the purple because it has more blue in it and it will go a little bit darker. So that's basically how that red is affected by the shadow. And I want to go on to the light sides. Obviously you can apply this with a brush just the same. Okay, so here's some green for the base, made just with yellow and blue so far. And this paper already started out to be a warm version of green, but plus it's got a yellow light on it. So if I hold this up, this is considerably greener than that paper. So the first thing I'm going to do is, with a clean knife, get a decent amount of yellow, and I'm sure that I'm going to need to add a hair of red into it to warm it up even more. But let's go step by step. It's already better. And I'm going to add a bit of orange to it, because it is more yellow and it's still a green, but it's become a warmer green. And when I hold this up, I think you'll find it to be a shade darker, but very close to what we've got on the paper there. I want to use the darker version of the paper next to the shadow, because that in essence hasn't been affected by the light that much and is partially in the shadow and will allow me to have more of a soft edge on that shadow. And I'll take away some of the edge so that I can add on the light side. The paper color, if I turn off the light, you'll see how close that is. When I turn the light on, you'll see how the yellow light has really affected it. So I'm adding some white, but I also have to add more yellow. So I've taken the green that was correct, affected by the light, more white, and actually going up the color scale a notch, I've added more yellow because it will become too dull if I just add white. I also want to change it. It has enough warmth that I'm going to add a pinhead of red, and you'll see that that makes it change. Yep, that might be too much. There we go. Okay. So this was like mixing my color swatches. I went from my green, and now I'm at this color, which is very close to what I've got out here. I'm going to put just enough in here so that you can get a sense without taking a long time. By using these three primaries and the super simple palette, you'll end up with a very harmonious painting because each object will have some of the same exact pigments in each thing, and it will unite it. I'm now going to move on to the red in the light. So again, starting with straight red, I need to literally turn the light on that. So I'm going to add white, bit by bit, not a ton at once. And of course I get pink, which is not the color that we're looking for, but always up the scale, one color up and adding some yellow. Now we've got two different reds. This one stays darker. The one on the left is going to have a lot more yellow in it. So let's see how this is looking. And it's much darker at the bottom. So I'm going to put a little bit of that shadow color into that red. And that's because my light source is coming from here. So my lightest and brightest is going to be right in this area. Now this red has some green in it, so I want to keep that away completely from this side. I really can't do more than red and yellow, or it will become dull and totally lose its vibrancy. So I'm adding some more yellow. I'll add a little more white. And as it goes back into that base, that's a little bit more in shadow, it gets darker and has more of the strong red color. The spot where it is the absolute lightest is right here. The inside has a lot more yellow. I should say the inside, the back side, opposite the core, goes into an orange on this particular apple. And I get a tiny dot of a shadow inside there. So I'm back to my shadow side. And let's get that highlight on. Highlights are never pure white. They're a mixture of the color of the light and the object that they're on. So I will take a little of the yellow orange, add white, and I will soften that edge, which is a lot harder to do with a palette knife, but we can do it. So that spotlight, that reflection, is the light reflecting off. And it's sort of like a halo around it, blends away softly. And then I'll finish it with just a tiny bit of the light source itself. And I think you'll see it will work. The opposite side of red has quite a bit of yellow in it. Again, I'm adding yellow and white because it's lighter and brighter, headed toward the light source. Just adding white to the red would have given me a pink container. Adding black to the red for a shadow would have given me a color that would have been a little foreign to the red, but I can show you that in a second. And this guy even has more yellow in it, especially in the hierarchy. I'm not going to complete this whole thing because this is really about color mixing and using your simple palette to mix and make any color you need to. I'm going to finish that off with some more yellow because that's what it's reflecting. So closest to the light source is where you're going to be the lightest and brightest, and then it changes, 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 changes. And that's what makes painting fun. So try some color mixing. The more practice, the better. You'll get good at it in no time. Have fun. Thank you.